for?
Speeding in the school.
Was it a camera ticket?
My favorite name. So it was an actual like sheriff that. It was everyone was speeding. I didn't
Wait,
even.
where
know.
was this? In DC?
No, it was in Texas,
Oh, yeah.
and it was in one
I was
of
like,
those
what
like
sheriff?
Texas. It was in like. It was like the school sign, the school zone sign had like trees in front of it, so I didn't know it was a school. I also drive a bright. Doing it in everyone was speeding. Yeah, it's just a fun fact. My look. I've been staring at like videos.
Is it like one of those things you can have it playing in the background?
But it's just like. And this program that the thing that I'm doing asks you personal questions. It asks you like, what's your name? Just to it's actually you.
Wait a minute. You have to pay a ticket and then you have to take a class?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, you should.
What a pain.
Sorry.
Hey, you.
Everyone else is doing great.
How are you?
A lot more work because the parents are eating. We're like,
My long time no see.
I know, we were just zooming this morning, so on a meeting, we're like, hey, again, like, she can't get away from me.
Are those yours on the? All your things are on the.
Oh, no.
I'm brainy.
Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know, I was downstairs and I was on a call and the person's like, oh, stop raining, it's so beautiful. So I'm like, it is? Well, beautiful, but.
All right,
I'm coming in her window.
I'm just gonna stand up here and get us started. So welcome everyone to our second speaker series event of the spring semester. Tonight, we're learning about youth engaged research for educational change. Really thrilled to have Dr. Kongji Chin and Dr. Leigh Kelly with us tonight. So I'm going to give them a brief intro and we'll get started. Dr. Kongji Chin is an assistant professor of language education in the Department of Teaching and Learning at New York University's Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development. As a transnational scholar trained in both China and the United States, Dr. Chin's research centers on understanding and addressing inequality in and through language and literacy education of immigrant youth in U.S. schools. Drawing on critical race theories, gender studies, post-structuralist theories, post-colonial theories, and discourse analysis, his research is driven by questions that lie at the intersections of immigration, identity, language, pedagogy, and justice. His work features 3 interconnected research programs: understanding immigrant adolescents' racialized masculinities and their language learning, preparing culturally and linguistically responsive teachers for immigrant students, and redressing educational inequality faced by immigrant youth through anti-racist pedagogies and critical participatory action research, or PAR. Dr. Chin is currently leading the Immigration, Literacy, and Dignity Project, supported with a 2022 NAD Spencer Postdoctoral Fellowship. In this critical PAR project, he collaborates with both teachers and immigrant youth to explore how an intergenerational research collective of educators, students, activists, and university-based researchers can support immigrant youth to engage in critical inquiry and linguistic activism to counteract xenophobia and racism. And then next we'll have Dr. Leigh Kelly. And Dr. Kelly, I'll have you also introduce Allie, who's joining you. So Dr. Leigh Kelly is an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Education at Rutgers University. She is also the founder of the annual Hip Hop Research and Activism Conference. Kelly taught high school English for 10 years in New York, where she also developed courses in hip hop, literature and culture, spoken word poetry, and theater arts. Dr. Kelly's research focuses on adolescent critical literacy development, Black feminist theory, hip hop pedagogy, critical consciousness, and the development of critical, culturally sustaining pedagogies. Dr. Kelly's work has been nationally recognized, including receiving the Nasir Jones Fellowship at the Hutchins Center for African and American Research at Harvard University, the 2022 National Academy of Education Spencer Postdoctoral Research Fellowship, the 2021 Save the Kids Hip Hop Activism Scholar Activist of the Year Award, the 2020 American Educational Research Association Writing and Literacy Special Interest Group Steve Kahir Early Career Award, and the 2019 Rutgers GSC Alumni Association Distinguished Faculty Lecture Award. Her scholarship has been published in academic journals such as Equity and Excellence in Education, Journal of Literacy Research, Learning, Media, and Technology, Journal of Adolescent and Adult Literacy, English Journal, and Youth and Society, and her research on hip hop literacies and critical consciousness is the subject of 2 forthcoming book publications. And if you don't mind, applause, yes. If you don't mind, would you like to introduce also the person that you brought with you tonight?
Sure, I mean, we were gonna do like a whole thing
Oh,
in our, but I could just, but I will let you know that she's in the room. So Allie Smith, who is currently an undergraduate student, a senior, about to graduate this semester at Howard University. Very active, an active activist, to sound kind of redundant, does a lot of work in the political arena, as I know many of you do, and is also an incredible spoken word poet. I'm excited for you to hear from her.
Right. So without further ado, we will go ahead and get started, and Dr. Chin is going to start us off.
Okay, great. So good afternoon and good evening to people who probably are not in the same time zone. So as Dr. Stevens introduced, my name is Kongji. I'm assistant professor of language education at New York University. I'm very excited to be here today with you all. So thank you very much for joining me and Dr. Kelly on this important topic of equity and justice in language education. I want to thank Dr. Stevens again for inviting us and other colleagues at Georgetown University to make this trip possible, having us to be in conversation with you all. Dr. Stevens, after you invited me, I did a little research on our program here, educational transformation. Oh, cool. So I wish I had that opportunity when I was in college doing teacher. We do need more teacher education program that explicitly center criticality, transformation, reimagination, and abolishing in our, work with teachers and future students. So I would like to start our conversation tonight with this pitch of my research statement. It's funny, we just had a workshop at NYU on how to, engage storytelling of a research for change. And I would just like to get a few response. Why do I say speaking not enough for language teaching? Or when you think about when you learn a foreign language in addition to your first language, what was the goal that your teacher said you were supposed to achieve, or what was your goal?
Word that's popping in my head is translation.
Can you say a little bit more?
I'm thinking like, if your question is what, because I took Spanish classes, for example, right? And so I'm thinking the teacher's goal in that moment was to, of course, teach me vocabulary, but also I think to help translate so that I could communicate in English and Spanish, I guess. Or,
Okay, so translate to communicate.
here we go.
The other, yes,
They might want you to, in your end goal to be.
fluency, still communication, achieve fluency. Yeah. Here, one more. What was your goal when you learned that first foreign language, or world language?
Connect with people.
Connect with people. So it's either connect with the people, learn culture, or learn language, speak, achieve the fluency. But what we're going to talk about tonight is more than that. So language for critical conscious, conscientização, and activism. That's really capture of my research program. So I'm going to, so first I'm going to introduce you my research focus, my positionality, and the trajectory, and how the process of doing the variety of research have been done that searching for the pedagogy, the approach to research I'm right now doing particular research. And then we'll talk a little bit about participatory language pedagogy before I move to discuss what participatory action research looks like in language education field, both the pedagogical decisions around the participatory and the research have a similar theoretical groundings. And I'm going to share with you the current project I'm working on, the Immigration Literacy and Dignity Project. Then we'll switch to Dr. Kelly's So my research, the central concern of my research is on understanding, addressing inequality in and through language education of immigrant students in the United States. I use the term immigrant students to refer to students who are either foreign born or whose parents have one parent as immigrants. In the field of language and literacy education, we have a variety of terminology being used, including the more deficit labels such as limited English language proficiency students, LEP students, or the more neutral one, like language learners or English language learners, or the more asset-based one, emerging bilingual students. I choose not to use emerging bilingual student because while it highlights the multilingual asset of these learners, it does not capture the social political struggle, particularly immigrant students and refugee students. Think about how these students, the precarity of their life they're facing, this doesn't capture those aspects of their life. So I use immigrant students to capture that part of their life and use immigrant multilingual learners to capture their linguistic identity and motive. So the first area of my research is from my dissertation work, focused on understanding adolescent immigrant student racialized masculinity and language learning. This is from my dissertation work, a 2-year-long ethnography work in one US high school to understand how immigrant young men negotiate the idea of what does it mean to be a man, to be a racialized gender young man in the United States, and how that plays out in the language classroom in relation to their language learning. The second area of my research focused on preparing linguistic responsive content teacher for immigrant students. With the increase of immigrant student population in the United States and other countries because of globalization, war, and conflicts, displacement, the issue of preparing students in the content classroom is also important. So in this work, I focus on how science teachers integrate their understanding of language to develop this linguistic responsive science instruction for immigrant students. The last area of my research, we address education inequality in immigrant students' schooling experience through anti-racist pedagogy and participatory action research. It's a recent development. In this work is prompted by particularly the recent racial violence during COVID-19 pandemic, anti-Black violence, anti-Asian violence, and anti-Semitism and xenophobia. So you're probably wondering, why do I use a right triangle to connect these three lines of my research? Because Holocaust, like the yellow star or pink triangle, we used to identify Jewish people. The red star was used to identify political prisoners. So the National Multicultural Education Foundation in the United States used the right triangle as a commitment to show how educators should be allies to those who are being marginalized as a critical thinker to address social justice for those who are oppressed. So my journey to search participant action research is not so straightforward like this. Actually, it's a roadmap that filled with curves, up and downs, and critical reflection on my responsibility as a researcher. I want to share with you one emotionally fraught moment during my research process that really pushed me and prompted me to think about what kind of research I should engage in. As I shared a moment ago, my first area of research work is from my dissertation work, looking at street immigrant young men and their racialized masculinity in one classroom. To spend 2 years in the school and in ESL classroom with them, I learned that their negotiation of what it means to be a man, an immigrant young man in the United States, is deeply intersected with issues of racism, linguicism, xenophobia, Islamophobia, as well as homophobia. They often perform their masculinity in the language classroom in a way that the school and teacher would consider as transgressive, deviant, and problematic. So those are very important to understand the inequality their students, these students face is important to share. But because of the nature of the work I was doing as networking work, that's asked me to be a non-participant observer in the classroom. And there was no opportunity for me to intervene the inequality they're facing. I remember one time that was before my graduation from Michigan State University. I was writing up my research statement for job application. It was late in the library. I was writing about how these students are subjected to compounding layer of oppression. And oftentimes they didn't know about that. And that was contributing to their downward trajectory in academic journey and everyday life. A huge overwhelming sense of paralysis and guilt just hit me. I was in tears. I was so guilty that I wasn't able to intervene and I wasn't even able to tell them what was going in their life that contribute to their being rendered as problematic students. So that's where I started to think about what kind of research I should do. 2 weeks later, I went to a literacy conference in Southern California, where one of the leading scholars in this country on participant action research, Michelle Fine, did a lecture on participant action research and literacy. And she talked about how she and her colleague at the CUNY Graduate Center engaged working with youth to do work addressing inequality in their life. I remember that night and I wasn't able to sleep. It was not tired, but it was a sense of critical examination of my role as a researcher, my responsibility, and the excitement of finding participant action research. And to not only to understand the inequality these students are facing, but also working with them, collaborate with them to address the inequality they face. So now I'm going to move on to this participatory language pedagogy. So both participatory language pedagogy and participant action research is rooted in the critical work of Paulo Freire. You probably already read this scholar. He was a scholar, a Brazilian critical in Brazil. He was a critical education scholar. His work with adult learners in northwestern Brazil not only help them to learn the literacy, but also to address issues they face in their everyday life. So he wrote, the pedagogy of oppressed. A pedagogy must be forged with, not for the oppressed, in the incessant struggle to regain their humanity. And he further explained what does it mean. He said, this pedagogy makes oppression and its cause objects of reflection by the oppressed, blaming critical consciousness. And from that reflection will come their necessary engagement in the struggle for their liberation. And in this struggle, the pedagogy will be made and renewed. So then what does this kind of pedagogy translate to language classroom? So in language classroom, participant language pedagogy necessarily integrate language learning with action over activism. It centers the issue of concern to students in teaching language. It's not just, learning how to use language to order food. It's more than that. It aims at foster students' critical consciousness of their social reality while developing their language skills to speak, read, and write. So it's a both and approach. So it's not just say we only focus on, critical conscious, not help them to learn language, both and. In addition, it aims at engage students in act upon the social reality that they're facing. So are any of us, the students, are any of you are language education major? Okay, so if we think about participant action research in comparison to the traditional non-critical language education, talk about the pedagogy. Right? So the participant action pedagogy is what proliferates problem posing model of education. It centers on, teaching language meaningful students, raise their political consciousness, and empower them to use language to act upon the social inequality. In contrast to the non-critical language education, what he calls banking model of education, is to develop student linguistic knowledge and teach them how to communicate. And in the non-critical language pedagogy, curriculum is a prepackaged curriculum, whereas it means developed by textbook company or mandated by the state or created by the teachers. And in that view, language is viewed as a system, as grammar, as a sentence, as paragraph, as grammar. It's a tool of communication. Teacher is a facilitator, is a knowledge holder. So teacher come into the classroom, model the dialogue for the student, teach the grammar, and students are recipient of the teacher's knowledge and practice the dialogue in variety of ways. Drills, you probably remember when you learn Spanish or French, the drills you practice in the classroom. In contrast, in participant language pedagogy, the curriculum is what we call emergent curriculum. Means the curriculum is developed through the teacher's consideration of the students' concern, their critical insight, and needs, and it's always developed from their concern in everyday life. And language not is beyond looking at language, the tool of communication, language as agency, as a tool, as an instrument of power. And teacher in this context is a facilitator, but mentor, but also teacher and learner. Learn students as that, learn their needs, learn the knowledge they bring in. Students are active participants in the decision-making process of teaching and learning. They work supportively with each other to act on social problems in their life. So here's an example that I shared with you, the article that my course and we started look at the 3 teachers that work with immigrants, learners. So one of the teachers, Mr. Baker, his unit, Letter to Representatives, is an example of participant language pedagogy. As you can see from his unit goal, the students are to identify contemporary topic they care about. So it centers on issue they're really concerned about. They also learn to write a argumentative, pervasive letter to their representatives to ask them to address the issue in their everyday life. So as I said, this unit features participant action language pedagogy as integrated critical civic education, activism, and writing instruction for immigrant students. Students engage a range of learning experience, support them, and empower them to write letters to their elected representative about issues impact their lives and community. They learn representative democracy. The teacher bring in even the representative into their classroom. They write letters. They learn letter writing as the democratic way of pushing for change. Identify issues impact their life and learn about that issue, inequality, and act upon it. So as you can see from this example and the discussion, conceptual discussion we have, participatory pedagogy is not classroom participation, right? It's not to both student participation or increase the participation. There are three pillars of grounded participant pedagogy is criticality, epistemology, and action. So criticality is that this pedagogy is really oriented on critical issue that the society face and the education school system face. And what I mean by epistemology is how we learn, how we know. So in the traditional classroom, teachers are viewed as a knowledge holder, and we transact the knowledge to the students. But in the participatory approach, students are also the co-contributor of the knowledge production. So teacher, as we said a moment, teacher learn from the student too. And it focuses on action. So this participation is not a neutral one. It's not just stop in the classroom, it's spill over to the, outside the classroom, onto the street, into the moments. So that's action. And these three pillars are also central to participant action research. Now move forward to. So what is participant action? It is rooted in principle of justice and democracy. It is an inclusive, collaborative approach to research, defined both by participation and a determination to produce knowledge for social change. It's a stance, so it's not a research methodology, it's an epistemological stance to engage knowledge and expertise beyond every tower by involving those who are most intimately affected by the research in shaping the research question, frame interpretation, or design meaningful research products. And that said, these three pillars are also central to participant action research. So it's because participant action research interrogate inequality, impact individual community under siege, often draw upon critical theoretical framework, critical race theory, critical psychology, feminist theory, queer theory, decolonization, Marxist theory. Epistemology, critical epistemology in participant action research, because traditionally research on students, like my dissertation work, ethnography. So I was observing the students, I was researching on them. But participant action research with them, the marginalized individual and community, center their critical concern and their critical insight become part of the research process, contribute to the research process. This project also designed a public science for public good. That is, be of use to struggle for justice, to challenge dominant lies, to support social movements, and to uplift silent voice or perspective. As you can say from this long list of scholars, this participant action research is rooted in critical participant action research that from a generation of scholars. And these scholars are working along communities, marginalized communities, to address issues in their community. One, if you're very interested in who are doing this, Michelle Fang at CUNY Graduate Center and her team has a huge, many years project, a program of research in equality, in education and other sectors of society. So why we need participant action research in language education? And first of all, we are living in the time with enduring inequality and massive injustice. As we talk about, anti-Black racism, anti-Asian racial violence, anti-Semitism, LGBT community under attack, economic disparity, abortion rights, immigration injustice, war and conflicts. In addition, language education itself reproduce inequality. We think about the English language teaching is mirrored with colonialism and neocolonialism, and linguisticism and racism. Like who is supposed to be a language teacher is also racialized concept. And language learners, particularly immigrant learners, are facing compounding layers of oppression. And more importantly, language has a complex relationship with social reality. So first, language constitutes social reality. So I'm going to play this. I don't know whether we can do this, but let's try. So Toni Morrison's insightful, argument about language capture that language is not just for communication; it's constitutes social reality. She also talked about a language is a living thing over which one has control, but most as agency, as an act with consequence. So this is what we talked about earlier, language as agency. Language act upon those social reality. And this is what also Paulo Freire talked about. If you remember his book, he talked about speak a true word is to transform the world. So what he means by true word is not a word that people, the politicians nowadays, thought and prayer to people who are impacted by different inequalities. And he means reflection and action. This reflection is critical understanding of inequality that individuals are subject to, and act upon it. That is what a true language and what he called praxis, action with that critical understanding. He said reflection without action is verbalism. Thoughts and prayer, to people who are murdered by mass shooting from politicians is verbalism. Also caution us, like action without critical reflection is blind action, what he called activism, blind action. So like that, this is also important for us to do participatory action in language education because inequality in language education. Now I'm going to quickly go over the current, projects, research in PAR, research in language education. It just started to get attention in our field in language education. Very few, actually. This scholar, I think, Borsay 2016, she wrote in her article that she didn't find any part research project when she was writing that paper. Because 2016, another scholar is Carlock. His article published at Harvard Education Review was published same year. So you can say that in language field, my field, this is still a very emergent agenda. So the purpose of part project language education include use exam inequality in student schooling experience, use examining inequality in HIV outreach in Spanish community, or racial profiling of Latinos community, or community organizing among immigrants to address racism that children face in school. The last one is a program that done by Murray Backhaus, is a social linguist in UC Santa Barbara, support youth to carry out social cultural linguist research in peer group family with critical awareness of inequality. The PAR have this transformative power because it developed youth civic engagement, develop the critical conscience of social inequality, affirm their identity in gender social change, and enhance students' academic learning and engagement. But there are also tensions, so I'm just going to briefly mention a few. One is how do you center youth voice, but also understand that youth need a guided participation from adults in that process. In addition, school at the social structure is often in tension with critical transformative mission of PAR. For example, teachers are being under pressure to deliver the mandated curriculum facing accountability pressure, and how do we not co-opting PAR project to go back to that banking model of education. School is also institutional reproduction of control. Oftentimes, there are school structures that oppress students. If you engage with PAR with students, students might need to disrupt those structures, and which can be hard. Now, I'm going to briefly share the project that I'm working on right now. This year, actually, last week, I was in the classroom, observed the teacher doing this. So this project was to explore the possibility and the power of anti-oppressive language and literacy pedagogy for youth learning, identity, negotiation, and social change. It is situated in one English arts classroom in New York City, where I use multiple methods to have an intergeneration research collective, including me and the teacher, activists, and the students, to help students understand xenophobia and racism, and also engage them to counterback this inequality. So this project has 3 stages. The first one is the collaborative research with the teachers to develop a unit of anti-oppressive curriculum focused on understanding immigration and language, and teaching students to do inquiry. The second one, that one just complete last semester. The second one is ethnographic research, observe how teachers go about teaching that unit, because you have curriculum, but how to teach is really tricky too. The last phrase is that students will use the skills they learn, critical language skills they learn, to counter back xenophobia, anti-immigration rhetoric in media and social media through storytelling, writing, and activism. So I also have a project with transnational language teachers using participant action and testimonial to develop their anti-racist pedagogy. If you're interested, I'm happy to share a little bit more about that. I want to end our conversation with this quote from late Congressman John Lewis, that do not get lost in the sea of despair. Be hopeful, be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year, struggle of a lifetime. Never ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. So thank you very much. Let's get in some good trouble.
this time. Yeah, I was like, I just hear myself.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
How are we doing?
Fantastic.
So Allie's gonna step in a moment and this is something beautiful, but just to get a quick temperature check in the room. Just have a shout out for those who are from DC or what do we call this, DMV area? Interesting. Auditorily, if you're from DC or the DMV area, let's hear the shout.
Let's go.
Yes. Where's everyone else from? You just shout it out.
California,
California.
Nebraska.
Nebraska. Someone say Thailand or Ireland?
I said Iowa.
Iowa. None of the above. Any other places that have not been shouted out yet? Texas. Yes. Anyone from New York? Two of them? Okay. New York.
Because usually New York will go, well, yeah, usually New York will go.
Should I say Brooklyn? Would that give us the only response that we need? All right, team. So I'm going to start did the timer start? Oh, my bad. I'm 90 seconds in already. It's fine. So I am thrilled to be here, to be in the city, to be in this room with y'all. Some of my favorite people on the planet are in this room, and that like rarely happens. So this is incredibly exciting for me. So thank you for having us here. So we're going to kick off with, as I said, a really special treat from Allie, and then we'll get into some research things.
All right, y'all. So I'm gonna do a piece. I'm a little under the weather, so excuse me for anything. But okay, here it is. As I write with the blood of 1,000-year-old women who hid their scars under cotton-stitched rags, who drew maps and whispers and carried their family on their backs. I am shaky with this pen due to all the pressure they have put in my fonts, reminding me to always stroke life into their wounds so they can be, exist, and called by name, as I am the only one who knows how it feels to be on the other side of their pages. A piece.
Oh, come on, poet. Ancestors font line is.
Thank you. So that piece is just like where you come from. I'm from Memphis. I'm really big on repping my town and, you know, my ancestors and things of that nature. So that was that piece, and that was inspired by that.
So I'll just say real quick, not to reiterate that really incredible bio that you read. I was like, who's that? Can I be her? So what is not in the bio is that I am a DJ, a vinyl DJ. So this is a weird space for me to be in because everything is digital, and I don't know, it doesn't sort of reverberate my heart the same way that records do. And also I was a radio host for a little while back in the day, and also a New Yorker. And so I'm going to, as New Yorkers do, I'm going to speak really fast, and I try to slow myself down because I know it doesn't help people process information the faster you go, but I'm always trying to do the most in the least amount of time. And so you can just sort of like throw a hand up for me to slow down when you feel like things are moving too fast. And I'm really excited to co-present with Allie Smith, who I gave you a brief intro, but she also has done really incredible work in Memphis, also in this area that I want you to hear about. So Allie, can you tell us a little bit more about what you're working on?
Yeah, so my name is Allison Smith. I'll just give my Howard intro because that's easiest for me. So I am a graduating senior.
Come on.
Majoring in sociology. And just a little bit about my work. So I'm really big on community engagement. I came here in a very naive and eager way from doing community work and grassroots activism back home. So I came here, I was like, yo, I'm about to make some legislation. I'm about to be in the room where it happens. And it turns out that wasn't quite what it was. It was a little bit more, for lack of a better term, it wasn't as genuine as I thought. So now I've just been more trying to get back into that more grassroots feel and finding community and things of those nature. And on campus, I had some leadership roles in terms of SGA and government and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. But Howard is Howard, and Howard is a great institution, but it also prepares you for everything. So yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
About the poems, I'm curious, are you doing poetry in Memphis?
Yes.
Okay.
So a little bit about the poetry. I used to be a slam poet. So I used to do Brave New Voices. I'm not sure if you guys know about Brave New Voices, but I was on the Memphis team, and that's pretty much it.
So if you have time for it, especially in the Q&A, I personally would love to hear more about, I know, I don't want to stress you out. I know second semester seniors are like, don't ask me what's next. But I'd be curious just to know, like, if you could imagine the world and create it, you know, in the way that you want it, what would you be doing, you know, come summer, so just think about that when we get to Q&A. As my cue is, what would you like to be doing next? And of course, how can we help and how can we support? So Allie and I actually met in sort of 2018, 2019, when I was recruiting young people to join this project, this initiative, the Hip Hop Youth Research and Activism Conference. Shout out to one of our HHYR mentors who's in the room.
Obviously, I'm really loud and excited, so it's.
So I just give you sort of a background for what this work is and how it came about. As a high school teacher, as a teacher educator, I spent a lot of time thinking about and advocating for attention to youth culture and youth imagination in the development of pedagogies that would support young people's, what Robin D.G. Kelly would refer to as freedom dreaming, right? Towards the building of their civic and social futures. According to Nicole Mira and Tara Garcia, this approach to speculative education involves imagining oneself or one's community into new modes of living and interacting. By engaging in critical reflection and dialogue about what has come before, what exists now, and of course, what could be. So the latter part of that, developing a vision for a future that's free of oppression, free of injustice, is one of the goals of critical pedagogy, of course, and social justice education. But I eventually came to realize, this is kind of an unpopular opinion, that schools as they currently exist are limited in their ability to truly cultivate the type of speculative dreaming that is required for young people to engage in radical future building. So I began this project as a way to invite young people to dream together, to create a youth-led teaching and learning community that is rooted in youth imagination through art, through activism, and through popular culture. So building on theories of youth speculative civic literacies and social design experimentation, which we'll only briefly talk about, but we can talk about it more later if you're interested. This project examines how activist-oriented youth engage in generative world making in their collaborative design processes. This project moves beyond the study of how young people imagine their social and educational futures by also exploring how they build towards these futures in their design and facilitation of a youth-led education, arts, and activism community. And so real quick, just to get, I feel like it's hard to discuss this work and not contextualize where it comes from, right? I think talking about these projects, as we often do, especially research in a vacuum, like I just happened to be at the school doing a thing. And it's like, what is a school and why are you connected to it? So it comes from my humble beginnings as a high school English teacher in Queens, New York. Shout out to New York. This is actually one of the first classrooms I ever taught in. And something cool happened when I first visited this classroom to set up the tables and do bulletin boards. I don't know if y'all can see this, but that's a boombox.
Oh.
Raise your hand if you've touched a boombox before. A couple of us. All right, cool. So at the time, this was actually like a modern boombox because it could play CDs, right? It was like a tape one. And this is a time where we still did that. And so I had a CD book in the classroom. And any given day, when my students came in, we'd be playing music, right? I'll play some suggestions they had if they gave me the CD, or if I had it, I'll play music from all types of places, like Bollywood music. It didn't matter. If I had it, I was playing it. So my students would come into the classroom and it already felt like this welcoming environment, right? And then over time, just so you know, I did, what do we call it, New York City Teaching Fellows. And so I had also not been trained to teach by the time I was teaching. Y'all know how that works, right? So I was really like literally figuring this out as we went along. So over time, I started to bring music into my lessons, right? I was like, well, if TLC has metaphors and we're like Shakespeare has metaphors, why not talk about music, right? To convey these understandings about literary devices. So it started from a more sort of superficial context of bringing music into the classroom as a way to connect my students to learning and to connect us to each other, right? And because I was the age of a lot of the older siblings or parents of my students, it was also a way that their family life came into the classroom, their communities came into the classroom. we do a thing in the class, the next day they're like, my mom was playing waterfalls in the car. And I'm like, as she should be. So I developed this idea, this notion of critical hip hop literacy, which is moving again beyond that sort of superficial, like Shakespeare has rhymes, so does Tupac, but thinking about how we can work with popular text, specifically hip hop culture, hip hop music, hip hop artists into the classroom in order to have critical dialogue about the ideologies, the identities, the societal issues that are reflected in these texts. And that then led to, hi, darling. Welcome back. How are you? To me proposing this idea for teaching a high school class that was solely dedicated to working with hip hop texts, again, as a way to have these critical conversations, right? Because it's not enough to have these one-off lessons, right? One Friday in March, we talked about Tupac, right? And I thought we really need to dedicate time and space to interrogating what popular media is saying about our world. What are the messages that young people are receiving? How are they processing this information? So that class actually led to some of these understandings I came to around young people and how they engage with popular music and culture in the classroom, right? One is that critical hip hop literacies can, I'm doing it right, y'all can slow me down, can foster young people's socio-political awareness, which Watts and Hipólito Delgado explain as a recognition of social inequalities and an understanding of the unjust exercise of socio-political power that creates them. I also found, and this is something I didn't necessarily expect to find, but that just came out of doing this work, that developing critical hip hop literacies can support young people's self-actualization, right? What we in hip hop call knowledge of self. How do you come to know yourself more from analyzing music and culture in the classroom? And so that led to the development of what we called the Hip Hop Youth Summit. What happened was I came to a point when I was teaching this class and I realized that I'm not an MC. We have some MCs in the room. You just heard one. I knew I wasn't, right? I was like, I'm not a poet like that. I'm not a rapper like that. I'm not a dancer like that. I'm a DJ. But I realized that I couldn't teach all 5 of the elements of hip hop, right? I was like, I have 1, maybe 2. By the way, the 5 elements, real quick, there are 5. What are they? You know them. We know them.
On the board.
DJing. What else?
Dancing, breaking, graffiti, and knowledge of self.
Knowledge, right? And so what I realized was that I wanted to practice hip hop pedagogy in a way that was very hip hop, which is not me as the sole teacher in the room, right? I was like, this isn't enough, and this doesn't feel like a community-based type of learning. And so we designed the Hip Hop Youth Summit. By we, I worked with some professors, other students at Teachers College at Columbia, and we created the Youth Summit, which invited young people, college students, high school students who are doing any sort of work in the spoken word, social justice education, or hip hop sort of arena. So the hip hop debaters, I don't know if y'all have heard about them, but they came through and did their thing. And we invited them in to engage in workshops that were rooted in those 5 elements, right? The breaking workshop, there was a freestyle workshop, seat up here, right? And it was great, y'all. It was super well-intended. It was engaging. We did this for 6 years, right? We just kept going and it got bigger and bigger. And then something happened in the 6th year. Thank you for the alley-oop, by the way. I was rereading Pedagogy of the Press. Just a hand in the air if you touched this book, if you've encountered it. Okay, cool. Hand in there if you just understood it right away. It took me, so when I say rereading, I was like, yo, why don't it was just taking me so long to process these chapters. A, they're dense, B, they're translated from Portuguese. And I don't, right? I imagine if I spoke and read in Portuguese, it would have been a little easier to process. So I was rereading, really trying to understand what was happening in this text. And I reached this moment, I believe it's in chapter 3, where Freire says, we simply cannot go to the students. He said laborers and peasants, but in my mind, I translated that as students, to impose upon them a program whose content we ourselves have organized. Many political and educational plans have failed because their authors designed them according to their own personal views of reality. And I'd read this a couple times before, but you know, when you read something and you're in a different place, just kind of in your life, in your brain, you ingest it differently. And I read this and I thought about this program whose content I had organized for years. It was for the young people that we were inviting in. But it wasn't created by them, it wasn't designed by them, or even with them, right? I think I gave a survey and it was like, what did you think? What would you like to see differently? But I wasn't in conversation with students about what they would like to see. I decided who the keynote speaker was. I decided what the workshops were, how long they would be, etc. And so I read this and I was like, maybe this is not actually what I think it is. Danielle Filipiak, who's a professor at University of Connecticut, said, we must disrupt adult-centric hierarchies that tend to dominate classroom discourse, resisting the traditional positioning of teachers as solitary holders of knowledge and authority. And what happened was I thought I was doing this, right? I was like, this is an outside of school space that's kind of flipping things because it's hip hop based. There's all these workshops, but I was still doing the adult thing, right? Where I made all of the decisions and thought that I was in the position to know more than everyone else about how this should go. Ferry goes on to say in the following chapter that the revolutionary effort to transform structures, particularly these oppressive structures of schooling, radically cannot designate its leaders as its thinkers and the oppressed as mere doers. Leaders who deny praxis to the oppressed thereby invalidate their own praxis. By imposing their word on others, they falsify that word and establish a contradiction between their methods and their objectives. If they are truly committed to liberation, their action and reflection cannot proceed without the action and reflection of others. And so I just kept reading this over and over for a couple of days. And I was like, yeah, something's wrong here. Because I realized that I was doing the thinking, the conceptualization. And it was kind of like, hey, you all, those who I see as the oppressed because you're younger, you're students, right? You're sort of subject to these structures, come in and participate, right? But they were not a part of the thinking portion, right? Just the action. And so that's why I decided to restructure this, the Youth Summit into a conference called the Hip Hop Youth Research and Activism Conference, and to invite young people who are college students, who are high school students, to do the design, right, the conceptualization, the thinking part. And I wanted to position myself as like, I'll be the doer, like y'all come up with the ideas, and then we can sort of do together, and I can get the room, the resources, make the reservations, whatever it is, but I don't want to be in charge of this because it's not for me, right? And it should be designed by those it is, for whom it is for whom it is. Y'all know what I'm saying. So this is the general structure. My plan was to have something like 8 to 10 young people leading this. So there was enough to share the labor. So it's not like one person who's also got calculus and like SAT or the Regents in New York to take. And the idea is that it would be a 2-year cycle, right? Because year one, you're just trying to figure this all out. And by year 2, you're like, all right, I have some sense of what this could be, what it looks like. I did not invite any adults to be involved, adults, as others might say. But what happened was when I put out the call for young people to be involved in this project, there were so many non-youth that were like, what can I do? What can I do? And it just felt wrong, right, to turn away support. And so we had a conversation and decided, how can we have these non-youth be involved? We decided that they could sort of help out. Right? Like you can show up, you can help us with things, but you cannot be centered. And I think I specifically remember Ali saying something like, listen, as long as they're not centering themselves, like they are welcome. And so essentially we started with the design, developing the theme, et cetera, and then culminating in the annual conference. The Leadership Institute was something that came from the process of reviewing proposals for the conference, youth proposals, where from what I remember in the conversation, folks were like, I don't know if this is like ready yet to be taught as a workshop, but there's something here, right? There's nuggets of ideas. And so the Institute was developed as a way to support young people in developing their workshops, in developing their presentations, and sort of having some pedagogical expertise in understanding how do you teach and not just throwing people into this. And so I'll pause here to, I know that was a lot, y'all, to ask Ali to contribute anything, any details, memories, things I forgot about sort of the structure.
Yeah, so basically everyone had their strength. That's basically how we did it. Everyone was so, if someone was more so an artistic or a creative or something like that, they would have their reins in terms of like color scheme. Because there's a lot of things that we don't really know that goes into making something happen. It has to be appealing to the eye. So having someone who's well versed in that, you know, it took a lot of discussion and it took a lot of youth collaboration at the time. And I think that, you know, as there's this thing where, you know, there's a guidance aspect involved. So I think that when we had road bumps and things, we leaned on the wisdom that was in front of us instead of seeing it as like, oh, you know, we have to make sure that this is approved by so-and-so or this is approved by so-and-so. It was more so, it's approved because we said it's approved. And they're just like, oh, it's cool. This looks good from a, you know, an outside eye or something of that nature.
Absolutely. And I love that you said the conversations because they, y'all, we be on Zoom, we're like, we have a 45-minute Zoom meeting, and then 90 minutes later, we're still talking about sort of this one question. But that's how the structure developed, right? Is having these conversations, right? How should non-youth be involved, et cetera. So from a research perspective, some of the questions I was asking or interested in were, how do young people engage hip hop culture as a site of community building? as well as agency and activism. How do you develop and realize their collective imaginings of their social and educational futures in their leadership of this community? And what pedagogical theories and structures are developed in their design of a youth activist learning community? So there's time to really dig into the answers to these questions, but one thing I found fascinating was the idea of, as long as you have a good idea, right? As long as you're about what we're about, you can come present, but we'll sort of help you get there, right? I thought that was a really important pedagogical insight, which is kind of different from what happens in some calculus classes, right? It's like you got it or you don't, and like where is that space for scaffolding? This is a general timeline of how we structure, I guess, the academic year. The fall semester is essentially around recruiting folks to participate. And the spring semester is when we're on Zoom all the time, planning these things, figuring it out, inviting keynote speakers, and asking people to submit proposals for the conference. And then here's sort of a snapshot of what our meetings look like. Folks are joining from across the US. And so we typically meet on Zoom so that everyone can participate. We have some in-person meetings. This is sort of, you can see how it grows over time, how we've gotten bigger. And have had also a diversity of mentors involved and students involved. You look great.
I'm over here like, what happened?
In real life and in the photos. Here's an example of the call for proposals. These also have looked different every year. So this year, this is for 2023. So this year, folks decided they would write symposia, right? So panels, research presentations, projects that are happening outside of school, they could present those, visual art, performances, or just sort of irregular but standard workshops, right? Your team. And the theme for this year is reconnections, finding our purpose and each other through art, culture, and community. May 19th, Rutgers, if you want to come up, quick plug. And so the last thing I think it's important to share before we get into some dialogue is just to give you a sense of what this looks like. So I know it's hard to conceptualize something like this. I don't think it happens that much. So this is a highlight reel of last year's conference, again, to give you a sense of what it looks like, and then we'll get into the implications. Thanks, everyone. So I think, well, if and when we have time, we could talk more about all the things. You sort of saw the culmination, right? But all of that was from conversations, right? We had conversations around who should our keynote be. We looked at videos of different people. Like, this was not just a willy-nilly thing, right? Everyone looked across all the different videos of all the people that were suggested. And then we voted on who of those people we thought would be best for the theme at this conference, right? All of these processes. So as I said, not a whole lot of time to get into the research questions, but some things that I learned that I'm taking away and still thinking about from this project are the significance of intergenerational spaces for learning and community building, right? So you notice those workshops were taught by young people, and then there were teachers, there were professors who were in those workshops participating. And what I found, it wasn't just one or the other, right? It wasn't that only young people should be teaching or only adults should be teaching, but it was about the intergenerationality that led to everyone sort of coming away from with new understandings and learning from and with one another. I also found that including youth radical imagination in educational design and pedagogy is imperative to doing work that is responsive, right? That is culturally responsive, that is anti-oppressive. One quick example, I don't know if you noticed, the DJ was on Zoom. He was not in the room with us. And the reason is that the first year we had the conference, and Ali experienced this firsthand, someone thought that we were too loud. And so we were banned from having a DJ at the conference. But here's the thing, right? So I was lamenting this. We were at a meeting and I was like, oh, I can't believe we have a DJ. What should we do? Should someone make a playlist? And then one of the leaders was like, so technically we can't have one in the building, right? And I was like, yeah. He's like, so could we have a DJ on Zoom? I had not thought of that. And that's why we had a DJ on Zoom, right? And so that's the thing that we don't think about. We're not tapping in to the young people who are participants in classroom spaces, that they have ideas we may not even think about, right? That outside of the box thinking. And then also how important it is to have authentic spaces for youth leadership and social action. By authentic, I mean where it is actually about youth leadership, right? And not just the idea of it. So a couple of examples, Rena said last summer, in reflecting on the conference, it's actually student-led, because a lot of the programs I've been a part of, yes, there are some students that do take charge, but a lot of us just sit in the background and just kind of waiting, not being allowed to put input in and not being able to express ideas without getting overshadowed. But there's adults in charge, and what they say goes. It's actually student-led. Nico said the format for a lot of other youth development sort of things is that it's very adult-heavy. The youth are just kind of the pawns, so to speak. They have this whole thing for them to do, and then they just kind of put them in the system and then watch them kind of exit and enter. But this one is very youth-driven, youth-led. Denise said, I would say HHYRA is very, very, very different from other youth programs in that I've never felt more valued. And I've never had my contributions to a conversation or to whatever it is that we're creating or working on, like, taken super seriously and actually acted upon, right? So the idea that you can, yes, ideate and create and say ideas, but with this project, we're actually, as much as it's possible within the realm of the world that we're in, we try to act upon them, right, and make them real. And so the question that I have for Ali, who is a youth leader and an activist and artist, is, in your experiences with the work you do, how can folks who are in this room, how can adults in general support youth activism and leadership?
So I was actually asked this same exact question last summer. I was invited to a Black woman empowerment space, and it was youth-led. I was actually invited by someone who's a very close colleague of mine. Her name is Diana Bryant. Extremely amazing activist, great girl, just love her. But so we were asked this, and it's such a loaded question because it's like, how do you break out of the isms that are already surrounding your life as a youth? Because we're so discarded in the conversations of having autonomy or authority or anything of that nature. So when I was tackling this question, I said, just want somebody to listen to us. And as in and as no effort as that is, that actually matters because so much of us is erased. Like we see now in Florida, with the AP African American courses, we see that our erasure is in live time and that we often don't get to say what happens in terms of us being erased in history, us being, not seen as having a future, which we see with the education system right now, school to prison pipeline, we see it every day. So actually being there as an adult figure and actually there as a source of wisdom and guidance instead of the authoritative figure that students or kids are taught to obey. So that's one way. Actually investing. And when I say actually investing, I mean, not necessarily in a monetary sense, but in a sense of like, I'm actually investing in you as a person and acknowledging my personhood as a young person. So yeah, that's really the main goal. It's such a simple answer, but it takes so much work to do, because we're not taught to, speak up or advocate for ourselves. So it's such a process, but having that, place to go to in a person or in a teacher or in someone that's in a hierarchical high than you it means a lot. It means a lot. So.
Thank you. So please get in touch with us if you have thoughts and questions and ideas and things you want us to engage with.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers. And now we'll transition into a time of actually some refreshments. I believe we've got some cookies and things that we can pass out and take just a very brief, maybe about a 5-minute break. And then we'll come back and whoever would like to join us is invited to join for a real short workshop with speakers where we can get a little deeper into what they do. So see you all at 6:25. And cookies, I'll spread